John Monks, trade unionist and Lord, a brief portrait. A podcast by Peter Scherrer.
The next station is Westminster. Change for the Jubilee line. Exit for Westminster Abbey.
I'm almost there, just past Big Ben, and in 3 minutes I will be in the House of Lords. I'm Peter Scherrer, and I work as a freelance journalist in northern Germany. I have an appointment with Lord John Monks. Baron John Stephen Monks is a Labour Party member. He represented trade union interests for over 40 years. Monks was General Secretary of the British Trade Union Congress and the Brussels-based European Trade Union Confederation. A staunch trade unionist as a lord, there was an obvious question for my interview. Why is a Labour fighter of retirement age still sitting on average 3 times a week in the House of Lords of Westminster? Why is he still involved at such a high political level?
I was asked by Gordon Brown to take it on. Some trade unionists turn it down when they're asked because they don't like the notion of an unelected upper chamber. Quite others take it on. I was 66, I was retiring. I never had any time much for hobbies apart from watching football and my younger days playing a lot of squash, but I didn't know what I was going to do when I retired if I didn't do what I'm doing now in the House of Lords. Our job is to vet legislation proposed by the Commons, to revise it in certain ways, but at the end of the day the House of Commons is sovereign and will get its way if the government's determined enough. The elected chamber will win, but it's good fun quite often. I can't defend the House of Lords. If you're starting with a blank sheet of paper to write a new constitution, you wouldn't have a House of Lords. That's not the way it's ever been in Britain. Everything's evolved slowly over years and years of precedents and custom and practices.
How does Lord John Monks keep with parliamentary tradition in conservative Britain?
If there's a serious attempt made to abolish the House of Lords and replace it with an elected chamber, I would support that. I couldn't defend the House of Lords as it is. But having said that, there's a lot of very clever people in the House of Lords and Nobel Prize winners and so on, and who give the government a very hard time if they don't know what they're doing. Or, for example, at the moment, Sunak's government trying to establish a base in Rwanda for people who come in boats across the English Channel and the North Sea. The House of Lords have been stopping that.
What is it you're currently working on?
Well, I'm always working on economic issues, state of the economy. At the moment we're cost of living crisis. We've got the highest inflation rate of advanced European countries, the big ones. We've got low growth figures. That is, again, just as when I joined the TUC all those years ago, the old problems that we're not fully competitive as an economy. The southeast of England is, because it's huge financial services industry based on London. But after that, the other regions, the north and the west, Scotland, Wales, Northern Ireland, particularly bad, they're struggling. And they would, in a league table of European regions, they're sort of well below halfway again of the more advanced countries. That's still a number one concern. The second one would be trade unions. I mean, the Conservatives forever are always legislating against trade unions to try and curb strikes and so on. You know, in a democratic country, you can't suppress anger and worker frustration forever. That's what we've seen, a lot of strikes recently. So I'd say all that area is what I'm working on at the moment.
In a few days, on the 5th of August, John Monks will celebrate his 78th birthday. Since a long life always begins as a child, I wanted to know how he would describe his childhood.
A happy childhood, I think. The father was a district park superintendent for North East Manchester. My mother was a teacher, so what would the lower middle class in Britain, everything's characterised according to class. It's a big thing, so I'd define it like that. I went to a technical school, secondary school, not the academic one, but a more technical one, though I wasn't very technical. So I was in the academic stream there. And from there I went to Nottingham University to study economic history, which became a passion of mine.
Why did you decide to study economic history?
I was very interested in history from an early age, actually, and I found it very easy to be good at history academically. So I was always going to do that if I managed to get the qualification to get into university. So, and I was more interested in economic history than kings and queens and generals and battles. I'm quite interested in all that, but
the region where you were living, had that something to do with your decision?
I think so. I mean, Manchester is the original industrial city. It was the first one. Cotton industry was the first major industry to be revolutionized by technology. And so I would say, yeah, it was Friedrich Engels was around the corner in Salford with his mill, and one of the earliest mills in the world. Our teachers were very aware of the industrial legacy. In fact, there's an argument with London, but the first unions, real unions, started in Manchester, I think, though some London historians would disagree with that. I was on the moderate left, I would say, as a university student. I wasn't a communist, like quite a lot of my contemporaries from school were when they went to university. And it was an era when I was at school of the Cuban Missile Crisis, with a lot of people terrified of the bomb, and strong movements for disarmament were around. I was never a member of that. I was always more, let's keep NATO going kind of thing. It's important that we've got a proper defensive structure, because you don't know what the world is going to deliver. And you can see now, poor old Ukraine was the only country that really gave up its nuclear weapons, and look at the mess it's in at the moment.
Why didn't you decide to go on to be a researcher and then having a scientific or researcher career?
It never occurred to me to have an academic career. I don't think I'm particularly academic. I am interested. I like working with young people, so I was a visiting professor at Manchester University, particularly its business school, when I was later in life. And I always have a time for students who are doing research and PhDs and dissertations and so on, to talk to them about whatever if I've got relevant experience. But I didn't want to be an academic. I wanted to get out into the world. And I come from a family mainly of public servants, teachers, like my mother, a lot of her brothers and sisters were that. And I wanted to go in the private sector to see what the British economy, how it worked, and understand that. So when I left university, I went to the electronics industry.
When you went to the electronics industry, that was the first time you got acquainted with trade unions?
Not quite. When I was at university, I was acquainted. I was chairman of the Labour Club. We had links with the Nottingham trade unions. I had links in Manchester with the Trades Council, which is a sort of mini TUC, if you like, for Manchester. Strong communist influence in the Trades Council. As I say, it was not my politics, but I was admiring a lot of the people in the trade union movement. I was very well disposed towards the trade union movement. I never thought I was qualified to work for them. And at that time, when I left university, I certainly wasn't. But a year or two passed, and then I got a job in the TUC. Yeah, I was very lucky, really. I mean, I joined the TUC in 1969. It was a time of great industrial turmoil. Lots of strikes, inflation was high, great angst about the failure of the British economy to keep pace with the best in Europe, to keep pace with the Federal Republic of Germany in particular, probably. Which had recovered quickly from the war and overtaken Britain. What was going wrong? Why couldn't we do better with our cars, with our manufacturing in general? if we didn't sort that out, we were going to have government crisis after government crisis, which is what happened, actually. I joined the TUC because I knew something about, after in the electronics industry, I knew something about productivity and production. But a couple of people left, and suddenly the TUC was in the middle of an argument with the government about labour law. And I'd done a course on 6-week course on labour law. I was the one-eyed man in the kingdom of the blind, if you know what I mean. I was the only one around who could write the papers, and so I quickly got in touch with the London School of Economics and Professor Bill Wedderburn, who was an internationally famous jurist on labour law, and he helped me. I had some high-class help, and that labour law became a central issue for the TUC in the 1970s, and I was the guy who was doing the staff work on that, or leading the staff work on that.
10 years as General Secretary of the TUC, how would you describe the major cornerstones in that decade?
Well, the first thing to say is that when I took over in 1993, the TUC was at a very low ebb. We were in trouble. We'd been involved in strike after strike and lost a lot through the 80s. The big one being the miners' strike, which lasted 12 months. Arthur Scargill, president of the miners' union, was unbending, Mrs. Thatcher too.
Trade Unionist, how much longer can you stand up one side and see this union buttered by a galaxy of the Tories, the Coal Board, CBI and Institute of Directors? Come and take industrial action now and stop accepting scab coal, scab oil and scab iron ore. Practice what you preach and stop crossing.
There was a big clash and the miners lost. We were trying to solve the dispute. We were trying to help the mining communities. That was a disaster. The second disaster was in the print and newspaper industry, where new technology was coming in, computer-based keyboarding and so on, and our unions in the national newspapers wouldn't accept it. So Rupert Murdoch opened a new plan with replacement workforce, sacked all the ones who were in the traditional print centre in London. And there was inter-union problems about that, and the TUC was struggling to, A, trying to solve the dispute with Murdoch, but B, trying also to heal, keep the TUC together as an organisation. And for my predecessor, Norman Willis, it was a very, very tough time. When Norman retired, I was glad that I didn't have any problems of the same scale that he had had. And so I decided we're going to relaunch the TUC as a new modern organisation and so on, committed to Europe, committed to social partnership, looking a lot at the Federal Republic of Germany, looking a lot at Scandinavia, and seeking to introduce a less confrontational atmosphere into British industrial relations. That was my ambition, and to some extent, I mean, it was. I took over in 93. In 97, Tony Blair got elected. The Conservatives lost. And although Blair was a centrist and he was suspicious of the unions, he didn't want the unions to bring down the Labour government, which he considered the TUC had done in 1970 with Harold Wilson. In 1979 with James Callaghan, we had big strikes, big inflationary times, the Labour government trying to be friendly with the unions but not paying up. So Blair was suspicious of us, but personally I got on fine with him, but professionally I would have liked him to have been more in his heart for the workers, more in his heart for the unions.
Employee participation and European Works Councils were on the agenda of the TUC General Secretary. In a very pragmatic way, Monks used his acquaintance with former German Chancellor Schroeder to assert European trade union interests.
I mean, I've got one fond memory of Gerhard Schroeder. We were trying to get the directive through on information and consultation through the European channels, and it was being blocked by the British Labour government. Blair didn't, and Brown, they didn't like it. it was interference in business and so on. And Gerhard Schroeder initially helped them block it. But he did say in about 2000, after I'd seen him at Heathrow Airport, he'd been going through Heathrow, and I managed to get an appointment with him in the VIP lounge in Heathrow to say, can he unblock it? Because this is ridiculous. We can't, basic information and consultation, a kind of weak works council type setup. And he said after the election. And so Labour won the election, and the same day signed the information and consultation thing off because Schroeder had signalled to Blair, I'm not backing you anymore. So a little success.
Emilio Gabalio was John Monk's predecessor at the European Trade Unions in Brussels. He was aware of the pro-European stance of the British Trade Unionist and asked,
did I fancy a change? And my wife's Dutch, and yes was the answer. We considered it and set up in Brussels.
how did you manage to have a family life?
Well, we did, is the answer. I mean, Brussels is not so far away. You're doing quite a lot of travelling in the week. My wife is extremely capable. We've got 7 grandkids, 3 kids, one of whom's disabled, of the children. We had a lot to do, but I could manage to be around most weekends. I could manage. We had met to take holidays and so on. My son, who got multiple sclerosis, the rest of them were in good shape, physically and mentally, academically, and so on, as are the grandchildren today. So, yeah, we managed okay. We enjoyed it, and we enjoyed living in 2 countries. When my wife would come over and stay for a period, she's obviously speaking Flemish and speaking French, by the way, as well. So she was very much at home in Belgium.
At the 10th ETUC Congress in Prague in 2003, John Monks was elected General Secretary. He describes an important highlight of his first term in office as follows.
The first thing we had was the so-called Bolkestein Directive, which was a European Commission proposal with the free movement of labour around Europe. An employer could set up in a country and be governed by the rules of the home country. So, say, a Polish firm could come into Germany and pay its workers in Germany Polish rates. So it was the lowest common denominator kind of policy. And we managed to stop that. We mobilised the European Parliament and so on. So that was, I'd say, the highlight of my first term. But it was a time when quite a lot of governments, particularly worried about the euro, were looking to be quite austere. And so after the first term of 4 years, so that's 2007, the Congress in Seville launched an offensive. We're going to be offensive for a better deal for European workers. Well, we'd no sooner done that than the economic crisis began to start. First in America with the subprime mortgages, the hedge funds and private equity and so on. And then in the Eurozone with Greece and in particular, but not just Greece, 4 or 5 other countries who were in big, big trouble. And Britain, too, was in big trouble. The banks had speculated. All the European countries had a problem. So we were on the defensive, not on the offensive. But we had an interesting discovery of modern capitalism, what it was like, which was it was a bloody big casino. And the banks, from Deutsche Bank saying downwards in Germany, from Barclays Bank downwards in Britain, I say, were gambling and were caught out, and had they not been rescued by the state, the whole banking systems of the West would have collapsed.
Welcome to Brussels, everybody, and what's our message today? No to austerity! No to austerity! No to austerity, and yes! Yes to growth, and yes to jobs. That's the message that you have brought.
I'm a bit of an enthusiast to discover more about how they did this to us. how they put the European and North American economies in such a mess. Maybe a second one in the second term was the judgments of the European Court of Justice in the Laval case and the Viking case. These were areas where Eastern Europeans, workers were being brought in to work not at the union collectively bargained rates in Scandinavia, but lower at the Latvian and Estonian rates. And campaigning against those, which only now are we looking like we may have a good solution. But starting the campaign against those was a big thing.
What would you write into the pupils' homework book for the trade unions? What homework do they have to do?
Yeah, well, I think probably there's different homework books for different countries a little bit. But I'd certainly, for British unions, I'd say we're still not anticipating problems. They hit us in the face, and then we scramble to try and deal with them. But artificial intelligence, do we know AI? Do we know exactly what we're going to be doing with that yet? We don't. Sustaining our manufacturing and R&D systems, not letting the United States and China run away with new technologies, and Europe lagging behind. That's a European must do better message, by the way, in the ETUC as well. Well, everywhere, to be honest. If you look at the number of patents in pharmaceuticals and in electronics, the United States is well in front of the European Union, including, for this purpose, the UK. So, must do better is always a teacher writes in a book, isn't it? Well done, but must do better. So I'd still say we've done a lot, and we keep doing a lot, and workers deserve our very best efforts to do better in future.
The Mirror called you a trade union veteran.
Yeah.
So with your long experience, what would you say is, on the European level, the most important challenge the trade unions have to face?
I think belatedly we've got, looking to the future, there's two big threats to the European system. One, undoubtedly, is free movement and immigration. And not so much within the European Union now, but the pressures from outside. Population explosion in Africa, with the civil wars and civil unrest and lots of problems, global warming in Africa, bigger deserts and so on. I don't know how we're going to handle that. We want to be generous to refugees. At the same time, we know you can't be indefinitely receive people from different cultures and so on without some trouble at home. And we've seen that in Germany. We've seen it just this week in the Netherlands, where the Prime Minister has fallen in his government and so on. So that's one thing. The second one is global warming. The fact that, last summer was the hottest ever seen in Europe since records began. 60,000, I think, died of heated-related problems in the EU last year. Those two problems seem to me that will dominate the future somehow or other. And at the same time, as we want to be generous from the advanced countries, at the same time we don't want to see the rise of the far right facilitated by the immigration problem, which is doing damage in some of our best countries for trade unions and social democracy are struggling to get a clear line on what to do about this problem. I haven't got a clear line. I wish I had.
So, still work has to be done. Thank you very much for your time. Peter Scherrer at Westminster in July 2023.